Welcome back to another edition of Enough Said. My name is Dan Barreiro, joined as always by Justin Gaard and Traffic Cop.
The my new inimitable under my name.
Lori Fisher. It's a compliment. It's a very challenging job, especially dealing with a couple of chowderheads like us.
I had someone just last night say, why don't they listen to you guys when you say enough said?
Well, if we listen to you too much, then I'm not sure we ever get any content.
It loses the appeal of the show.
Too much news then after that. Yeah.
Right. Okay, well, let's get going. After a lot of anticipation, the Vikings plan to hire LA Rams offensive coordinator Kevin O'Connell as their next head coach. Now, O'Connell's headed to the Super Bowl, so a deal won't be done until after that. He's a 36-year-old former quarterback and will be the 10th coach of the franchise. Good choice, Dan?
Well, he checks all the cliche boxes that we're looking for. He's got a heck of a smile.
Yes.
He's young. He's 36 years old.
Good shape.
He's with it. He's got the good BMI score. And he's associated with a very successful head coach and a successful franchise that's going to the Super Bowl, of course, the LA Rams. And I will say there's one significant difference. That would be compared to the other assistants who've gone on to greatness in Cincinnati, the Super Bowl opponent, Green Bay, and even San Diego. They all have Hall of Fame or up-and-coming great quarterbacks. He's walking into maybe Kirk Cousins. So he's got that disadvantage. Can he handle all the difficulties of this job? We don't know. He's never been a head coach. He's called plays for about 15 minutes in an interim role, I think, in Washington. So the truth of the matter is there are risks associated with any way you go in this situation. And there are risks associated with this move, even though he checks all the cliche boxes. Collaborative guy, smiles a lot, that we're looking for.
This is almost exactly like the general manager hiring, except he has a little bit more experience in the actual role. And I think I said 2 weeks ago, we have no idea if it's going to work out. I know we're going to get to Jim Harbaugh in a little bit and that whole scene and that whole debacle. But when you go the coordinator route, especially now these young guys, you have no idea if it's going to work out. So the pedigree is kind of there because he has had a cup of coffee with Sean McVay. You remember when Cliff Kingsbury was hired by the Arizona Cardinals, they mentioned that he never really worked with Sean, but he was there for like 2 weeks and met a lot with them. And that was in their press release.
Inspired by him.
Well, that's how hot Sean McVay is, right? Speaking of wonderkeen coaches. So all of that works. I mean, this is the predictable NFL way, I would say, right now. The Jim Harbaugh thing might have been the unpredictable one. This is the predictable hire. Hot team, hot young coach, find people that know him, figure out if he can recreate the magic here. But we have no idea if it's going to work. Absolutely none.
No, and again, as I said, the disadvantage he has is, okay, if you look at the Cincinnati, did they hire a great coach? He's obviously done a nice job.
Sure.
Green Bay, LaFleur, done a nice job, although it ended badly for them. But again, I think we're learning there are limits to how much we can evaluate greatness in a coach, depending on what they have to work with. And if you have how big an advantage, we know this is not news, but it needs to be reminded every time we're assuming that because the other Rams assistants have been great, that this guy's going to be great, is those guys had the great advantage of outstanding either veteran quarterbacks or young quarterbacks. That cannot be forgotten here. And he's walking into a very different situation in Minnesota.
I'm not so sure we hired the correct Rams coordinator, by the way, with Raheem
Well,
Morris.
Been consistent with that part of it.
Because he's an offensive guy, he's a defensive guy,
more
players seem to like him.
Yeah.
I don't know. I know that they talked to him, but they clearly were infatuated with him because they made the move on Wednesday night to really make a bold statement and a surprising one at that. So only time will tell, as we say on the radio.
Enough said. You said Wednesday night. Everyone seemed to think Michigan's head coach Jim Harbaugh was the guy. It would have been his return to the NFL 7 years after leaving the 49ers. It sounds like no hard feelings, but do we think this is a missed opportunity or would have been a gamble, Dan?
I think it's definitely a gamble, but that's what I want to get back to. The assumption that the guy they ended up with wasn't a gamble is nonsense. It's a different kind of gamble, and it's a bigger gamble. We're learning, if you want to believe Jim Harbaugh, who had an interview with Mitch Albom, who's like Mr. Michigan, he goes back forever there, that, and this stuns me, a world-class coach was more interested in joining the Vikings than the Vikings, rudderless right now as a head coach, needing new leadership, was interested in him, which boggles my mind. And in the end, why didn't they? Why did the Vikings blink? Because they were afraid. And they're afraid because he's weird, because he's quirky, because he's a little off and he might be challenging. And for me, if you want to talk about bold leadership into the new century, the new decade, the boldest leadership doesn't worry about every box being checked and says, we had a rare opportunity that we might not have thought we otherwise would have had. Are you familiar with the Matt Damon commercial in which, well, I'll ask it this way.
Yeah.
In that commercial, does Damon say fortune favors the frightened?
No, he does not.
No, he does not.
Yeah.
And so, look, I admit there's a risk to this. I don't deny it, but I absolutely 100% would have taken it. I think it's a missed opportunity, and I'm, to this moment, stunned that the Vikings, however they had boxed themselves in on the rhetoric of inclusivity and collaboration, didn't say
intentional decisions.
The real bold leadership is, we got a rare opportunity for a guy who clearly is interested. Let's take advantage of it.
44-19-1 was his NFL record, NFC Championship game, Super Bowl, and you mentioned it in the first segment, didn't do it with greatness at quarterback. He got the most out of his guys. Alex Smith kind of had a rebirth. Colin Kaepernick had the best stretch of his career. And after that, neither one of those guys has really done anything, right? So that's what fascinated me about Harbaugh. And you know, because of the weirdness, I was a little iffy on it because he hasn't been in the NFL in a long time. You forget
and that's fair.
But you forget just how good that stretch was in San Francisco. When he took over, they weren't very good. He immediately turns them around, changes their, guess what, culture. They become a team of toughness. They've got great defense. He gets something out of quarterbacks that nobody got before out of them and since. So stunned is the right word. I was absolutely stunned on Wednesday night when this dropped off. And, you know, truthfully, the guy who I find endearing through this whole thing is the weird one, is Harbaugh. Think about this in 2022.
And then final
transparent with his recruits at Michigan, saying, hey, the NFL's calling. Super Bowl thing still kind of bugs me. I think Michigan's going to be good no matter what. You should still go there, but I got to see this thing through. Saying that I went in 100% intentional.
He didn't deceive.
About being, which is so rare. I almost, that makes me miss him now even more, and we never even really had him because it's so completely rare in this business. But that he definitely wanted the job, and the Vikings, for whatever the reason, at the end of the day, said, not going to work here.
Are you familiar with Teddy Roosevelt?
Real quick, Dan.
I am.
You remember his quote? Are you familiar with his quote?
Speak softly, carry big stick.
Well, that's one of them. Here's another one. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena.
Oh, I love that one.
Who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly.
Wow.
That's the mistake by the Vikings.
I've
They
got
may
goosebumps.
have failed.
Yeah.
But with Harbaugh, it could have blown up. But at least you would have dared greatly. That's
Enough
what he
said.
represented. We're never going to get another shot at it. And the new guy might end up being great. This doesn't mean he can't.
Well, for his sake, I hope he is.
It just means that everybody's going to do the comparison from this point forward,
100%.
and it's the Vikings' fault.
Next up, former Miami.
It's going to start at the press conference, too, by the way. They're going to say, what happened with Harbaugh? And O'Connell's going to be sitting there going, hey, I got the job.
We have to move on.
Sorry, Lori.
Thank you. Former Miami Dolphins coach Brian Flores is suing the NFL and 3 teams alleging racism in hiring practices. He says the Dolphins owner tried to get him to lose games to get a better draft position, alleges the Giants and Broncos only interviewed him because he's a minority. Flores wants a number of issues addressed. The NFL says the claims, though, are without merit, Justin.
They do, and this is unbelievable. And he did the media circuit, and now other organizations, including John Elway, are trying to clarify or at least defend themselves against some of these allegations. Do I believe that, to me, Dan, the most damaging part or the most believable part is the Giants situation with the Bill Belichick text basically congratulating the wrong Brian on getting the job before Brian Flores had actually interviewed. I think that happens all the time. I think that happens every single cycle. And really, as Flip Saunders would say, the truth cannot be controversial. Look at the hires of this cycle so far. Vikings, white guy. Broncos, white guy. Bears, white guy. Giants, white guy. Raiders, white guy. Jaguars, white guy. Now, there's still 3 openings left. We'll see what happens there. But I absolutely believe a lot of this stuff. Do I necessarily believe all of it? No. I think we're going to find out, who's telling the truth on some of it. But the general crux of the argument, I 100% believe.
The question, I'm not certain, if you listen to employment lawyers who work in this field, they're not convinced there's enough detail to win the case in court.
Right.
That's going to be, there's still some issues on specifics, because you're going to have to, they're very serious allegations, but they're going to be, they may not be provable, and that's sad because that doesn't necessarily mean they're not true.
Right.
That's the controversy with this thing. I think my own view on this is that even with the Rooney Rule, we're not going to get to that place that we all think is fair until more general managers are of color. And that might be the sign of progress with what's happened here. Now, the irony is he hires a white coach. But
right.
I think once that starts, you're going to have a better chance that they're going to open the door and be more open-minded than necessarily the Rooney Rule as it pertains to which coaches you're going to hire. That, I think, is the best case scenario. The throwing games thing, if he's got proof on that, he might end up owning the Miami Dolphins. Who's to say?
Zuccarello at 6:56. Here is Zuccarello. Another chance. Stops, waits, set up, score! Oh, Zuccarello.
Welcome back to Enough Said. Did you guys watch the game? The Wild beat the Blackhawks in Chicago 5-0, a shutout for goalie Cam Talbot. The Wild have a lot to be excited about besides the win. Matt Boldy is staying, and Jordan Greenway just signed a new contract, and they're actually roomies right now. Did you
Which
guys know
you
that?
love, of course.
You love that.
So
That's
cute.
the side of it. You're always going for the human
Those other
angle.
side stories are just so fun.
Yeah.
The Wild don't play again until Tuesday due to the All-Star game. Kaprizov and Talbot are out in Vegas right now for that. The Wild on a 6-game winning streak, Dan.
Everything's wonderful, and do you guys agree with me that there's a bigness to NHL being on TNT? And that, of course, I believe was a TNT game.
It was on
I think
Wednesday.
it's great for the league. It's obviously a good showcase in this case for the Wild to further expose the Wild. Oh, is that you're talking about the controversy regarding?
Oh yeah,
some
we'll get to
comments
the
made?
controvery. But go
we'll
ahead.
get to that. Bottom line is, what can be? How is it going? Could it go any better for this team than it is right now? We've talked about depth with this club, and I think that may be the controversy that Guardsy's alluding to. For years, there's been talk, well, you know what, their strength is in their depth. But the problem was, do they have enough star power? Right? That was the issue. Now, we may have the best of both worlds because we have some legitimate star power, obviously starting with Kaprizov. We have some emerging young players again, and then we still have a lot of depth. That is, at least when everybody is healthy. So that's all good. I mean, it's basically full speed ahead at this point, Guards.
And you can win however you need to win, whichever style you want to play. You want to get down a couple of goals. None of it matters. And truthfully, you mentioned it. I mean, what's going wrong right now? Nothing. The last 8 games, the fewest goals they've scored are 3. Remember the days when we would just grind it out for hours, it seemed like, to get 1 or 2 goals and hope that we got good goaltending? Now, every night you put 3 in the book and say move on. I mean, they had 5,
and
7,
3's low.
8. 3 is like the lowest they've had in the last 8 games. But they're so good. You mentioned TNT. It's kind of happened with the Wolves with Charles Barkley within the last week. We might be able to talk about that too, where once you get those spotlights on you, you want the validation, right? You're watching the TNT game. Wayne Gretzky's there. It's unbelievable. And then a couple of the analysts just completely cut the legs out from under you. And we're at that point now where we get to be bitter with the national media for not respecting our club like we think they should. Even though at the end of the day, who cares? Doesn't matter. They're still going to make the playoffs. They've got a great chance to host a series and all of that. But that's where we are. We get to be mad at the national media for not loving the club like we do.
In fairness to them, the reality is, as much as we watch them every day and we're gushing about this season and the promise of what might be ahead.
There's 30 teams in the NHL?
Until you do it in the postseason, this is what you're saddled with. And it's the way it works, not just for the Wild, but it works for any team.
Enough said.
There's still going to be a little bit of that skepticism until you take the step, and this is the time for the Wild to do exactly that.
The Timberwolves beat Detroit last night, putting them on a 3-game winning streak. Did you guys see Anthony Edwards' video of ordering McDonald's, telling the reporters to just
I did not.
wait?
Yeah.
You have to see it. It's
the McDonald's
another cute
got some
video.
McChickens. Yep.
He got, I don't know if he went with ice or no ice, but he did say something about ice. Well, anyway, back to the team. The Athletics' Johnny Krasinski has been telling you guys, I believe, to take this team seriously. Are you doing that now, Dan?
I'm taking them more seriously. I'm not ready to anoint them the team to beat in the postseason. But where I will give them some significant credit is, although lately they've really been scoring explosively, even with D'Angelo out.
Right.
And Edwards, they destroyed a red-hot Denver team, getting nothing from Edwards, and D'Lo didn't even play, I don't believe. So that's impressive, and they're scoring more. But to me, the fact that they've become a serviceable defensive team, they're ranked, I think, in defensive efficiency 11th this year. That's not great, but it's so much better.
It's enough.
We're used to being in the 20s. We're used to being in the 40s, and there's not even 40 teams in the NBA. That's how bad our defense was. So To me, that's the biggest sign of maturity, that maybe they're starting to figure something out. And you do have to give the head coach, our guy Finchie, some credit for that for sure.
Well, what I like about him in particular is kind of like what I like about Evison, is he doesn't care who the players are. Right? He knows who the max guys are. He knows who the stars are. But if they don't have it that night, let's say when D'Lo's playing, if he doesn't have it in the fourth quarter, he'll put somebody else out there. He doesn't care. If Malik Beasley once a week goes off for 5 threes, he'll leave him out there. I love that about him, because there should be no sacred cows on this team, right? I mean, you could probably argue Cat, because he's done it the longest and he probably deserves more chances to work through things. But everybody else is just whoever's hot. He just wants to win that particular game. And, yeah, the defense is revolutionary. And 11 is not that great, but it shows you what we've all been saying is just get average
presentable
defensively.
30 seconds.
Because you're going to be able to score 120 on basically everybody. I think now they've scored 120 in their last 4 games for the first time basically in forever. So, yeah, this is, Lori asked, is it finally time to take them for real? Well, this is the stretch where they got to get themselves some headway, some leeway, I guess, because they came through that rough January okay, not great, but okay, and now they're starting to play some weaker teams that if they are the team that they say they are, they'll handle them, and they'll put themselves in good Western Conference playoff position.
Really quick. And Finchie, another great quote from him. I think we're kind of there, but as we know, things change quick.
They do.
There's an awareness he has that as soon as we start celebrating that we've arrived, we're in trouble.
Correct.
And that's the right, I think, sign from a head coach who's figuring out his players as well.
Teddy Roosevelt and Chris Finch quotes tonight.
Think about it.
I was going to say, how many quotes can Dan do
Well, and
tonight?
Matt Damon quoting, that's an old, I think it's an old.
Here's a quote, a thrilling ride. Tom Brady. That's what he said.
Very nicely
played. He officially
played.
retired this week. We thought, well, they talked about it last weekend, but he officially said it himself. His 22-year NFL career for the Patriots and most recently for Tampa Bay was filled with 7 Super Bowls, many passing records. He wants to spend more time with his supermodel wife and kids. We know they don't need the money, but will we see him on the field again someday? We'll see him in a million commercials, I'm sure, but on the field, Dan.
No, I don't think he's one of those guys who's going to milk it and maybe there's an injury next year and he's going to come back. I think he takes his performance too seriously.
Exactly.
What he needs to do to his body and mind too seriously. He's just going to walk in. I said it before, I'll say it again. As odd as this sounds, I still think he's underrated, because there's really nothing spectacular about what he does except for one thing. He makes the right play more often than any quarterback in history.
Yeah.
And right play doesn't have to be spectacular. It can be just a 4-yard read as opposed to getting sacked and losing 7. And other quarterbacks do that, but nobody does it or did it as often as he did. And to that extent, I think people yawn and go, oh, what's so exciting about that? I'd rather see Mahomes make a circus play. Those are all fun. I love those.
Yeah.
But I appreciate a guy who makes the right play as often as he did. It's uncanny. That, to me, is his brilliance, and that, to me, is where he's unmatched.
And I think what people have missed and hating on in the last few years is we're never going to see anything like this again. How could we? You know, every decade has had their team, right? 70s, it's the Steelers. 80s, it's the 49ers. The Cowboys in the 90s. Tom Brady took over the last 20 years a couple of different times. Twice with the Patriots, then he moves to play for Tampa Bay. To put it in perspective, his first Super Bowl, I weighed 175 pounds and had 3 earrings.
Think about it.
All right, I've lost the bling, put on a few of the pounds. Tom Brady was still doing his thing. It's ridiculous.
MJ, Gretzky, and this guy.
Welcome back to Enough Said. It is lightning round time. First up, Hennepin County Sheriff Dave Hutchinson says he will not run for re-election come fall. There are calls for him to resign after he pled guilty to a DWI crash in December. Dan.
I'm still not ready to call him a profile in courage on the basis of this decision.
Right.
I stand by the belief that he's undermined his own credibility. He was voted in, so I'm not saying you just cavalierly say he's out, but I still think that would have been the graceful thing to do, to acknowledge based on the inexcusable way he's gone about this whole process.
Next up.
Well, yeah, he didn't acknowledge really anything any step of the way. We talked about it a couple of weeks ago.
CNN President Jeff Zucker resigned on Wednesday, this after failing to disclose a relationship with a close colleague who was pretty high up in the company as well, Justin.
And it sounds like this was like the worst kept secret in the company too. I mean, that's what goes on out at the networks, right, Dan? And it's like this isn't the first. It probably won't be the last.
It'll be a Netflix series eventually.
Well, I've seen 2 or 3 of them already, and they're interesting, and people like it, right? They like the clicks. They're in it for this kind of salacious stuff, but Just seems like something about those offices that leads to this stuff.
ABC suspended The View's co-host Whoopi Goldberg for 2 weeks. She said race wasn't a factor in the Holocaust. She has apologized, but the network wants her to use these 2 weeks, they say, to reflect and learn, Dan.
Reflect.
Reflect and learn.
Her delusion was frightening, how delusional she was on her observations. Anybody who knows me knows I'm not a big get rid of them even for a couple weeks. I don't know what business it serves, but it's a game that's played by either side of the political aisle, and very few people are consistent with it. So those on the right who say too many others have been canceled on the left, they're reveling in this because they feel like on the other side, no one stood up for our guy or gal when they screw up, and we get this stupid cycle. I don't know what it accomplishes, her missing 2 weeks.
Some artists, next up, are removing their music from Spotify, or at least trying to, as backlash against the streaming service still airing Joe Rogan's podcast. He's accused of spreading COVID-19 misinformation. We're talking about Joni Mitchell, Neil Young, Crosby, Stills, and Nash. Justin.
Well, it's almost exactly what Dan just said, right? I mean, they can do that. They can have their opinion on it. They can say Spotify's going to survive. Spotify's going to be fine. I'm not a Joe Rogan guy. Liked him 10 years ago when he was doing other stuff. But I can listen to what he's saying. I can completely disagree with what he's saying, and I can move on with the rest of my life and not take everything I'm learning, unlike Aaron Rodgers, from the Joe Rogan podcast. I think we should be able to distill it on our own. But if artists want to do it, certainly they can do whatever
Turn
they
the
want.
dial. This isn't that difficult for me, and I know there's that issue of what he's saying is dangerous, and it might even potentially be, but the idea that we're going to shut everybody up, because that's really what this is about. If people are honest, it's about shutting people up, not just saying I want to not be associated with them.
It's that time of year. We're very close to Valentine's Day. I always like to remind you guys every year.
Yes, thank you.
Oh, that's coming up?
Nearly $24 billion is going to be spent, the second highest on record. You have a little more, like I said, than a week to go shopping. But if money's tight, I put on Twitter, why don't you just make dinner, light a candle, and make a card? Is that good enough? Make dinner together.
Well, I also see
together.
A top 100 reasons that I love you.
Yes, you can do that too. Or those coupon books.
Well, top 100 almost sounds like you're going to be mailing it in, right?
Yeah, some of them are going to be diluted.
Yeah, they're almost going to be
quality over quantity. Like top 3.
Okay, top 10.
You're going to be repeating
On
yourself,
the
aren't
top
you? You're going to go, what else?
reasons why I love you.
And finally, MnDOT released the winners of Name a Snow Plow Class of 2022. You guys talked about this when Natalie was here.
Yes.
Top 1, Betty Whiteout. Control, Salt, Delete, Scoop, Dog. But Justin, bad news. Sir Plows a Lot. Oh, so close, 9th place. Are you disappointed?
I am. We're knocking on the door, though.
You know what,
knocking on the door. Hopefully, Sir Plows a Lot can make a comeback in 2022, 2023. And Betty Whiteout, that's a nice touch, obviously in honor of Betty White.
Dan,
in honor of Donald J. Trump, I'm not sure I buy the vote. I'd like to. I think there may have been. I think the vote might have been stolen.
Really?
In this contest. Yeah,
wow.
I think we need some sort of investigation.
Enough said.